My name is Glennis Chester, and I am your host for the NFRW Empower Hour. I thank you for joining us this month. The goal of this series is to have in-depth discussions that are forefront in today's culture with experts in their respective fields, and also to give you the tools to speak with authority on topics that are important in today's culture. Today's program, we're going to be speaking on national security and specifically the Chinese threat to America, and also the relationship that China has with Ukraine and Russia, which I know is on everybody's mind. We see it on the news every day, and it's something that we need to have not only the knowledge of, but be able to speak to when we're talking to someone else that maybe isn't in the know. And we have a tremendous expert to talk to you about that today. So before we do any of the actual discussion, we have a few housekeeping tips that I want you to bear in mind. I want you to please keep yourself muted throughout the entire program. If you have questions, do type them into the chat feature, and at the end of the program, we will be going through those questions and Ashley will answer them for you. Let's see, forgotten anything? Oh, all of our programs can be found. If you have a friend that wanted to tune in today and wasn't able to, or maybe you missed last month and you wanted to hear that one, all of our programs can be found on the NFRW website. Please just log in as you normally would in the members only section under programs. Just hover over that, go down to the link that says NFRW Empower Hour, and there will be a spot right there that shows archived videos. And you can just look for the month that you want to click on and find all the videos there. It usually takes about a week. So this week's program will pop up about next week, more or less. Okay, so today's speaker, if you have never heard Ashley Smith Thomas, you are in for a treat. She has become such a dear friend of mine. She is the founder and CEO of Freedom's Fund USA, and if she looks familiar to you, it's because she's a frequent contributor to Fox News and several other news outlets that have an interest in national security. She is one of those people at first sight you think she's too young and beautiful to really know what she's talking about, but then as soon as she opens your mouth, your jaw drops and you just go, oh my gosh, I'm a slacker, because she is brilliant. She's one of those overachievers that her bio, I hope you read it. It was in one of our advanced advertisements in the Capital Connection. It's unbelievable. I mean, you can go on for days talking about all the things that she's done in her short life, but she is brilliant. And I don't want to take up too much time going through all of her accolades, because she is truly amazing and she has so much great information to give us. But you will walk away with so much knowledge tonight that you will be begging to have her come and speak to your state. And she will do it, which is the great thing about Zoom, because she can speak anywhere and you can have all these fabulous speakers come and talk to you. So before we get started, don't forget, put your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to all of those at the end. And for now, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us, and we're going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Glennis, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, and it is so fun being able to talk about China and China's influence in America, which sounds kind of strange, saying that it's fun, but I love the fact that being able to share with women what is going on at a national security level and why we need to be concerned what is going on from a national security standpoint, because we have to have a secure nation if we want to be able to live in freedom. So I like to show and share how freedom actually plays a role into our national security, as well as how our national security plays a role into our freedom. And so Glennis had invited me to come last year and give this speech and talk about China at the TFRW biannual convention in Austin last year. And when I got to the part of talking about China and big tech, the moment when I said that Google and China are working together, the lights and power went completely out at the resort. It was crazy. And they said, oh, it'd take about 5 minutes to get the power back on. And it actually ended up taking about 30 minutes. And so it was quite an ordeal. So hopefully when talking about China and our big tech, we don't have any technical issues. So, but I'm looking forward to it. So thank you again, Glennis, for this opportunity. So I'm going to jump right in here, because something that I think a lot of Americans just don't realize is the fact that we actually have an adversary. There are nations that are intentionally looking to undermine the United States because of what we believe in. You know, our founding fathers, when they founded our country, we were called the Great Experiment, because they wanted to see, okay, is freedom going to work, or is more of a socialistic society going to work? And so when they put the test in order, socialism did not work. It was freedom. And so therefore we have our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, our Bill of Rights. We are a nation that exudes freedom. And unfortunately, there are nations who can't stand that. They don't want the people in their country to understand and know what freedom is like, particularly freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. Those are considered a threat to some nations. And so when I talk about China, what is interesting is a lot of people don't even realize the threat that they pose. So today, I just want to be able to share with you that there's a serious situation toward our national security and toward our democracy. America has been known for decades as the ultimate superpower nation. And in 1945, when the United Nations was established post-World War II, the 5 leading nations were and continue to be the United States, the UK, China, Russia, and France. However, we have a competitor that is fast approaching in their attempt at expansionism and global dominance. This competitor is fierce and has waited a long time for this moment in history. And if America's rival wins, it will be the end of our nation as we know it. So who is the greatest threat? China. The Chinese Communist Party, which is known as the CCP, is the current ruling party of China. And according to the Council on Foreign Relations, the CCP has had a monopoly on power in China since the Mao Zedong-led party defeated nationalist rivals and founded the People's Republic in 1949. And with that, it has been reported that there are 90 million members of this movement, in which 70% are men. In 2012, President Xi Jinping consolidated control over the party by pushing the legislative body to end term limits, which creates a path for him to rule indefinitely. So then in 2017, the CCP reaffirmed President Xi's dominance and surrounded him with new officials in order to help him with their agenda to be the second largest economy in the world. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, the CCP was actually founded in 1921 on the principles of Marxism-Leninism, as they were inspired by the Russian Revolution. A civil war broke out in China and the communists gained the victory in 1949. The modern Chinese state remains a Leninist Marxist system, just like Cuba, North Korea, and Laos, and the CCP relies on 3 pillars: control of personnel, propaganda, and the People's Liberation Army. So here in America, we are seeing the ushering in of communism through various Marxist movements, politicians, censorship, the stripping of our First Amendment right, the attack on religious freedom, identity politics, the communist propaganda in our educational system. We see the cancel culture movements, the suppressing of our freedoms of speech, thought, consciousness, as they attack our values and principles and traditions as a nation. And never before in the history as a nation have we seen a leak from the Supreme Court of the United States pertaining to a draft of a potential decision regarding Roe v. Wade. And now we have progressives who are protesting outside the homes of Supreme Court justices, bullying, harassing, intimidating, threatening them and their families, because their goal is to influence the outcome. And yet we have a president who refuses to condemn this behavior and calls those who want to make America great again extremists. So now we see in this whole scheme of things, the threat toward coming towards taking away our guns and then seeking to violate our Second Amendment right. So we have to know our constitutional rights. We have to defend them. And recently at a PCRW meeting, which is Park City's Republican Women here in Dallas, we had a guest speaker and she said, if you don't know your rights, you won't exercise your rights. And if you don't exercise your rights, you will lose your rights. So that is why we have to know them. We have to exercise them so we don't lose them. And more, we are starting to see politicians embracing Marxist ideologies, as well as welcoming China's influence in America. And all the while, they're not holding China accountable for stealing our intellectual property, to include military blueprints, the failure to report COVID, grave human rights violations, sending spies to commit espionage in America, their involvement in Afghanistan, their involvement in Russia and the Ukrainian conflict, and more. So we see politicians on both sides of the aisle implicated by having some sort of tie to China. And China has one goal and one goal only, and that is global dominance. And in order to be the dominant global leader, they must subdue nations through their expansionism and break the only nation that stands in their way of them accomplishing their goal. That's the United States of America. In the book Art of War, which is written by Sun Tzu, a Chinese military strategist and general, he said, quote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. China has subdued America from within, and it is time that we, the people, become aware, alert, and awaken to what is occurring in our nation. It's time that we understand the threat toward our freedom and our national security so that we can protect it." So today I'm going to share with you, because there's quite several incidents that I could talk about China and their threat of war and their movement towards Taiwan, but today there's 4 areas I want to specifically address that China has greatly influenced and impacted our nation. That is 1, entertainment and culture, 2, education, 3, big tech, and 4, the border. In the famous words of Sun Tzu, he said, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle." So today we're going to know the enemy so that we are not defeated. So entertainment and culture. According to The Atlantic, in summer of 2019, industry watchers had objected when the trailer for the film Top Gun Maverick 2, which is Top Gun 2, was financed by the Chinese firm Tencent, which omitted the Japanese and Taiwanese flag from Tom Cruise's leather bomber jacket. In the past 20 years, Hollywood has become passively accepting China's increasingly heavy-handed censorship. And The Atlantic reported that the censorship is increasing as part of President Xi's decree that every film released in China must be vetted now, not only by the Central Propaganda Department, but also by the Ministry of State Security, the State of Ethnic Affairs Commission, the Ministry of Public Security, the State Bureau of Religious Affairs, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and other numerous bureaucratic entities. How ridiculous is that? Apparently, there are 3 T's that China looks for and does not want mentioned in or any reference to in Hollywood films: Tiananmen Square, Tibet, and Taiwan. And any mention of those 3 T's, the film will not be shown in China. So according to CNBC, China will be the largest cinema market with a box office revenue that is expected to jump from $9.9 billion in 2018 to $15.5 billion by 2023. That's more than the US, as ticket sales have decreased due to digital streaming platforms such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, and more. They make more money opening in China than in the United States. And unfortunately, Hollywood is willing to sacrifice freedom and human rights to gain money. That is the power that China has in Hollywood. But then let's also look at the NBA. In 2019, Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey, he tweeted, quote, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." After creating a firestorm, Morey issued an apology in which Mike Bass, the spokesman for the NBA, founded Morey's tweet, quote, "regrettable," and his views, quote, "deeply offended many of our friends and fans in China," end quote. China immediately demanded that the NBA fire him and threatened to pull contracts and deals with the NBA, and the Chinese Basketball Association announced that they were suspending their cooperation with the Rockets. They announced that they would not broadcast any Rocket games. So LeBron James, he quickly sided with China and refused to comment on Hong Kong protesters who were standing up for their freedom, yet he had no problem aligning with Marxist BLM. Then there's Disney, which shows strong ties between China and ABC, which owns Disney and ESPN. And according to the Federalist, quote, "American companies establish financial ties with Chinese companies to gain access to China's massive consumer market of 1.4 billion people. However, with that comes the price of sacrificing freedom in order to appease the CCP. So what is astounding is the fact that we have Hollywood elites and celebrities tout freedom of expression, and yet they align with a nation that is against the freedom of expression, speech, thought, consciousness, and religion. It makes no sense for a group of people who talk about progressivism to actually regress by allowing China to suppress their freedom of expression and speech. So China has suppressed Hollywood, the NBA, major corporations, airlines, and more, and yet they accept it because of money. And we need to understand that a foreign government is controlling and telling US-based companies what they can and cannot do, in which these US companies are bound to US law, not China, and that should be alarming to everyone. However, there is some good news. After the pressure pertaining to the removal of Taiwan's flag off of Captain Pete Maverick Mitchell, Tom Cruise's leather bomber jacket, Tom Cruise moved forward with putting the flag back on his jacket. Even more so, Tom Cruise moved forward to not allow China to censor them. And therefore, according to CNBC, Tencent, the Chinese investment firm, backed out of investing in the film as they were upset that the movie shows pro-US military, which could, quote, anger CCP officials. So once they backed out, producers had more flexibility in their decision making, and it certainly paid off. So while the film is no longer allowed to be shown in China, Americans showed up across the nation to watch Top Gun 2, in which the film made over $124 million over Memorial Weekend, breaking opening records. Worldwide, the movie made $248 million opening weekend. And the people are still rushing to see Top Gun 2, which has become the highest grossing movie ever. So that should encourage us that one, someone in Hollywood stood up to China's censorship, and two, it should show us that we don't need China and their audience. And so now we have education. Believe it or not, Chinese propaganda has infiltrated our education system, not only in our universities, but K through 12. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and former Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos released a letter in fall of 2020 to schools across the United States warning them of Chinese propaganda and Confucius classrooms. In their letter, Secretary Pompeo and Secretary DeVos called the Chinese government-funded program a, quote, real and increasing threat to U.S. classrooms. According to the Washington Times, China had sent curriculum and Chinese-trained teachers to hundreds of schools in America, ranging from K through 12th grade. Secretary Pompeo and Secretary DeVos stated, quote, Confucius classrooms are in reality an important element of the PRC, People's Republic of China, global influence campaign now reaching tens of thousands of U.S. school children every day, end quote. Many American educators are unaware that the Chinese program is linked to Beijing's Ministry of Education and is part of a carefully crafted influence program designed to hide facts about the CCP's abuses, according to U.S. officials. So according to Cheryl Atkinson, a well-known journalist revealed a China-backed program called the Confucius Institute is happening in American schools. China's education ministry said that the Confucius Institute is, quote, to aim to protect Chinese language and culture in foreign countries, end quote. The Chinese Education Ministry generally provides funding for the materials and staff at these institutes. And since 2006, the Chinese government has spent more than $158 million on schools in the US, mainly at universities, colleges, and a few high schools. And the universities do not hire the institute's instructors, the CCP does. So here in Texas alone, which I know that there are universities and Confucius Institutes across the nation, but in Texas alone, in 2018, two congressmen, Republican Michael McCall and Democrat Henry Cuellar, they both work at the federal level, sent letters to the administration of Texas A&M, Prairie View A&M University, the University of Texas at Dallas, and the University of Texas at San Antonio, and the Texas Southern University that hosted the Confucius Institutes on their campus. Once they were notified by Congressman McCall and Congressman Cuellar, Texas A&M immediately terminated contracts and closed the institutes. Prairie View A&M University did the same. However, University of Texas at San Antonio and University of Texas at Dallas enhanced their Asian studies instead. So it's not clear whether or not they actually shut down the institutes, but one can surmise that they did not, since they had enhanced their Asian studies. And now what that does is it basically transcends right into big tech, because tech has a major role in our everyday lives. I mean, the fact that right here we're on Zoom and our computers and our phones, tech is huge. So therefore, in 2020, I wrote a brief for a very specific government entity showing the link analysis of how China is using rare earth elements to advance in technology, which threatens our national security and defense. So by using rare earth elements and halting the export of REs to the United States, China will develop their own technology in order to further their economy with the attempt to become the global leading market. China launched Made in China 2025, which is a state-led industrial policy that seeks to make China the dominant nation in high-tech manufacturing, surpassing the West in technology. The plan was released in 2015 as a 10-year plan to rapidly develop 10 high-tech industries to include Huawei and ZTE and more. In addition, China's plan is to become the leader in global markets by 2049 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. So therefore, China has no intention of slowing their global expansionism economically and technologically. 30 years ago, China made the decision to make rare earths a strategic material that the globe would need and ban foreigners from mining them in their own country. This paved the way for China to surpass the US as the world's leading producer of Re. By 2010, China reduced global rare earth exports, critically affecting the technological use of Re that had already begun. And this right there created global dependency on China's export of rare earths, which caused foreign nations to become dependent upon China for these elements, thereby significantly aiding in the boosting of their economy, of China's economy. So between 2014 and 2017, the United States imported 80% of its supply from China, and the United States had actually failed to compete with China on this front. Through REs, it's interesting because you see that the US actually obtains cell phones, batteries, computers, metals for various military hardware from China, which was a concern during the trade war between China and the United States under the Trump administration. So therefore, do not think for one moment that China was not involved in the debacle in Afghanistan that we all witnessed last August. It was reported that on July 28, 2021, top Taliban leaders met with China's foreign minister in Beijing, in which China legitimized the Taliban. 2 weeks prior to this meeting, President Biden had a phone call with President Xi. Coincidence? I think not. This gave the Taliban diplomatic power, which had never happened before. And this actually caused them to be legitimized. When the US, UK, France, Germany, Japan, and India evacuated their embassies in Kabul, China's embassy remained untouched and unscathed. So by China legitimizing the Taliban and recognizing their new form of government, the Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan, one can surmise that China's leverage and negotiation was or is to obtain rare earth elements and further their global expansion through their Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, which is China's global infrastructure development plan. It had been reported that in Afghanistan, it has over $1 trillion worth of rare earth elements, to include gold, silver, mercury, lithium, aluminum, and more. So the question is, why should this be of concern? Because major tech companies rely on China for rare earths to develop smartphones, technology, radars, batteries, microchips, etc. And same thing with our military. They rely on these rare earths to develop radars and other type of technological capabilities. And then let's look at Google. Google has close ties to China, as Huawei has become intertwined with Google. According to NPR, the chairman of Huawei has been hopeful that Google can influence US officials to allow Huawei to be in the United States after President Trump partially banned Huawei from entering our nation. Huawei has been leaning on Google to influence the Commerce Department on their behalf, and the purpose for this ban was to prevent American companies from doing business with Huawei due to national security concerns of surveillance, as they use software within their technology that could be used potentially as spying mechanism for the Chinese government. And another Chinese telecom company, ZTE, was also deemed a threat to US national security. And then we have the border, which is number 4. The last issue is the border. I mean, how many of you know, which this is astounding to me, but how many of you know that Chinese gangs are actually working with the cartel? In November of 2020, Fox News had reported that according to multiple Mexico-based security and intelligence professionals, the bulk of deadly work is carried out by the Losang Wing, which is identified as having, quote, the largest presence in Mexico for the trafficking of fentanyl and methamphetamine. Losang is a Chinese gang with a strong presence in Mexico who's working with the cartel to smuggle drugs into the US. And the cartel supply chain originates in Wuhan, China, where it can produce chemicals necessary for these drugs in large scales at low cost. The Zangs operate through shell companies that offer services, clothes, computer systems, or clinical laboratories in Mexico. And the Losang has the collaboration of custom authorities and members of the Sinaloa and Jalisco Nueva Generacion cartel in Mexico. And once they're in the United States, those drugs are transported by air or land. The Mexican cartels actually depend on Chinese counterparts for fentanyl and remain its biggest black market customers. And for the past 12 years, Chinese criminal organizations have become the backbone to drug cartels and money laundering billions of cartel profits in North America and Europe. So right now, we know there's a border crisis happening. And from sources of ours at my organization, Freedoms Fund USA, we've been told that over 100 different countries have been represented at the border, majority single military-aged males that have tried to smuggle and or traffic children and drugs into the US. And while we have not been able to verify if China is involved, we suspect that China is working with the cartel to further bring destabilization and using this weakness in our security as an opportunity for disruption operations. But let's take a moment here and look past our borders at the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. China has actually been gaining more momentum strategically, which should be a concern to the safety and security of our nation. Because while we are focused on what is occurring in Russia and Ukraine, Putin is actually using this conflict as an opportunity to get the West, especially the US, distracted to where we are not seeing what is really happening. And yet we just sent $40 billion aid package to Ukraine with no accountability, no transparency, and our leaders not answering questions as to why this type of spending is occurring when Americans are feeling the economic pressure and moms cannot find baby formula. So we're sending military aid to Ukraine, which is also depleting support for Taiwan should China invade Taiwan. So do you think that's coincidence? Not really. Here's the thing. In the book, Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America, which I highly recommend that you all read. It's by Rebecca Koffler. And she states, quote, Moscow's desired strategic outcome is a weakened United States immersed in political dysfunction, torn by radical, religious, ethnic, and other social tensions, struggling economically, bogged down in external conflicts, and alienated from its allies. A distracted America, forced to deal with domestic and international problems, is far less likely to interfere with Putin's strategic ambitions, end quote. Are we not seeing this today in America? And here's the thing, China views America the exact same way. Back in 2019, my husband and I, we actually briefed a panel at the National Security Council and was sharing with them that we were seeing this coalition being built between China, Russia, and Iran. And so they're all working together, those three nations, and they have successfully worked at flipping allied nations against the United States. So the art of war is, quote, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. And that is what is happening. Russia has sowed discord in our nation as well as China, and they're working together to break the United States. And so while the media has been incredibly focused on Ukraine, how many of you know that in the past month alone, China met with leaders in Saudi Arabia pertaining to oil? So according to the Wall Street Journal, Saudi Arabia has been active discussions with Beijing to price some of its oil sales to China in yuan currency, which would impact the US dollar's dominance in the global petroleum market and shift the world's top crude exporter to Asia. So look at how the table is turning toward China and nations now that are supposedly our ally, having discussions and entering into a relationship with China, which impacts the United States. And if that sale goes through, it would boost China's currency. In addition, look at the new Iran deal. The Iran deal that the Biden administration wants us to be back in. Who is actually leading the new Iran deal? Russia and China, which the Iran deal does absolutely nothing to better America. Rather, we are funding and turning a blind eye toward our enemy. So this is crazy, you all. And how many of you also know that China, Russia, and Iran also have a forward operating base in Venezuela, and that China purchased a port in Peru and now controls Nicaragua? So the CCP plans to also send their ships to Peru, which is a scary thought. And Russia has submarines not far off the coastlines. The CCP is inching closer by gaining territory, to include having influence in Mexico right now. So if we enter into a World War III and not watching the strategic moves from our enemy, America will be hard pressed on all sides. So this is why I am a firm believer, my organization is a firm believer, that border security is national security. This is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democrat issue. This is an American issue, and it's about ensuring the safety of all Americans, which is why we need to encourage our politicians and leaders to secure our border. This is why we need to secure ourselves from foreign enemies, but also stop the cartel, the drug and human trafficking and more, because we must secure our borders and change policy to ensure the safety of all Americans. So in closing, I know I have given you all so much information, and yes, it can be so depressing and it sounds like, we're all just going downhill from here. But I want to be able to offer you some encouragement, because I'm actually encouraged. Despite what we see here in the natural, I'm actually encouraged because more and more Americans are actually waking up and are concerned with what is happening to our nation. So I want to encourage you that hope is not lost. So while we have a rival that is seeking global dominance, we must do our part to promote and protect freedom. President Ronald Reagan once said, "Evil is powerless if the good are unafraid." So it takes good people like you and me to stand firm and push back against darkness. But we must remain unafraid. It's not an easy task, but I believe that together we can stand for righteousness, speak truth, and protect freedom. So I have a few action steps here, because I can give you all kinds of information, but I'm a firm believer in taking action. And the acronyms are FREE, F-R-E-E. So for F is faith. I'm a firm believer in praying for our nation. And while it may seem impossible, nothing is impossible with God. So we must pray for divine protection over our nation, that God opens the eyes of fellow Americans, that they may see what is going on and be open to hearing the truth. I also like to pray as well that angels protect our nation, protect our leaders, both at the local level, the state level, and the national level. Number 2, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to inform our family and friends of what is going on here in America, but also the threats that are arising toward our national security, to include China's agenda and their goal for global dominance. We have a responsibility to encourage them to research and critically think for themselves. We also have a responsibility to support local businesses and made in America products, other than products from countries that come from China. We need to stop purchasing made in China. And one way to stop the CCP is to hit them economically. So by this, it won't work if it's just one person doing it, but collectively as clubs, if you were to do that, I encourage you that will make a difference. So encourage your family and friends to stop purchasing made in China products. Number 3, educate. Encourage your family and friends to read the US Constitution and know their rights. If you don't have a pocketbook constitution, please let me know, because I'm happy to send you one. I'm an Academy Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, so I get pocketbook constitutions. So I'm happy to send you one. But it's so important to know your rights. Educate your friends and family on the history of China and their global expansionism and why that should be a concern to our national security. But also 4 is empower. I want to empower you to get involved in your local community and at the state level. I know that NFRW is the national level, but here's what is so important. We have to be involved in our community and in our state, because ultimately that's going to impact the nation, because there is a blatant assault on America right now, and we need to do our part to get involved and protect freedom. So I'm going to leave you with this. President Ronald Reagan once said, quote, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. That was fabulous. I told you that she had a wealth of information and you all would be impressed. I did not lie. She is amazing. It is a lot to take in, but clearly there is a direct line from China to our border, from China to Russia to Ukraine, and what is happening in America, not only in our educational system, but in entertainment. And it seems like the roots have gone into every part of our lives. And it seems like it happened and we didn't even realize it was happening. But now we know. So part of that responsibility part, the R in the free, I think, is for us to spread that message. So I would encourage each of you to please ask your friends to next week around June the 21st or the 22nd, tell them to log on to NFRW and look up this video so they can see Ashley's presentation, because it is so, so important. And we do have power. We are not powerless. We do have the power of prayer, and we do have the power of the pocketbook. As women especially, the power of the purse is very important. It's something that we should use mightily. When we shop, we get to decide who is going to be the beneficiary of our dollars. And we don't want that to be China. We want that to be America. So no, take it to Grandpa. I'm so sorry. But we can also, besides just buying American, we need to put pressure on our entertainers, our sports figures, on our politicians, everyone, to do the right thing. When I had first heard your presentation at our convention last year about the Tom Cruise movie, I was so incensed. I was like, I'm not going to the movie. That's it. I'm not going. And I'm a huge Tom Cruise fan. I'm not going. I'm just so mad at her. And I went home and I told my husband, he said, oh, come on. It's Top Gun. We love Top Gun. You want it? I'm like, nope. I'm not going. And then we hear all the reviews. And Mike's like, I heard that the patch of Taiwan was on his jacket. And I'm like, really? Okay, let's go see the movie. So we went, we saw the movie, and there it was on the jacket. Probably nobody noticed it in the theater except for us, because we were looking for it. But I was waiting to hear why. And I'm so happy to hear that it was pressure put on regular Americans that said, hey, look, this is an American movie and we can't let China push us around. So we do have power. So with that, I think there's a lot that we can do, and we do have hope, and we do have prayer, and we are a blessed country. And now we have the power of knowledge, which always puts you in a great position. So, Erica, do we have any questions from our ladies today that we want to ask Ashley?
I do not have any questions right now.
Really? Oh my gosh, you're a quiet group. No questions. Okay. Well, do I have any questions? I was going to come up with some questions earlier today, and then I forgot to do it. Let me think. Ashley, do you have anything else you want to throw in there for us?
Yes, I was going to say something real quick. So it's funny because I grew up watching Top Gun, love Top Gun, right? And it was just something that I loved watching with my dad. And then my husband, who's military background. He's Marine Corps Special Ops, but it's funny because he actually started in the Navy and then transitioned over into special operations. He was a Marine Corpsman. And
Wow.
what is interesting is he loved Top Gun as a kid. Absolutely loved it. He said he broke the VCR player because he watched it so many times. And so when we saw that Top Gun 2 was coming out, I was the same way. I thought, okay, no, I just can't support that. Like, that just stinks that a Chinese investment firm is really supporting this movie. But then I was like, okay, but it's Top Gun. Oh my gosh, now I'm going to contradict everything I've been talking about. So we went and we saw it. And I was like, oh man, this is so epic. And sure enough, we saw the Taiwanese flag on his leather bomber jacket. And I was like rooting. So yes, passionate. And so I went home quickly and did research. And that is when I found out that the Chinese firm had pulled out because they were upset that the movie was pro-US military, that they put the patch back on the jacket because also Tom Cruise got pressure from Taiwan. The Taiwanese people and the Taiwanese government, they were not happy and they were begging him, please do not be pressured by China. And so when he listened to the people, oh my gosh, it totally changed the dynamics. They had more flexibility to do what they wanted to do. And so I just thought if more people like Tom Cruise in Hollywood would stand up to China, how much more spectacular could the movies be because they're not under such oppression and suppression from China. And it also proves the point that we don't need China's market in order for Hollywood films to be successful. So that was an encouraging thing. But what I wanted to share too real quickly, there's a book called Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. And I'll type that title here in the chat in a second. But it's by Brigadier General Robert Spalding. And he talks in great detail how China has basically infiltrated every part of our society to even include Wall Street. So if you're looking at something as another educational tool to become more informed, I encourage you to read that book as well as Putin's Playbook by Rebecca Koffler. But I'll type that in the notes. And what I'll do, Glennis, I will give you notes from today. So that way you can share that with those who are on the program, because I know that was a lot of information. So hopefully that will help everyone.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I appreciate that. Okay, Erica, I think I saw one question pop up. Can you read that for me real quick?
Yes, it says, I've heard that China is extremely hard and unforgiving of drug dealers within their country. Is this true as we see drugs pouring into our own country?
That is a great question. I'm typing in here the name of that one book here real quick. I know that it's interesting how with China, there are a lot of things. They suppress and oppress the drugs. They suppress and oppress. They don't want gangs. They suppress and oppress those of faith, regardless of your faith. They're very controlling and oppressive of the people. What I find to be very interesting is this connection with Wuhan, because we saw that within Wuhan, there was the COVID and how it leaked from the Wuhan lab. But we also see with Wuhan is the level of drugs coming out. So the fentanyl, the methamphetamine, these chemicals that are used, that are coming out, then sent over to the cartel here in Mexico and working with the Los Zangs to get that into the US. So they are hard. They are unforgiving. They do punish. They're very oppressive. The thing about the Chinese culture, particularly with the CCP, and I'm not really sure if that's like culture as much as it is the CCP, in that they will never forget, they won't forgive, and they will never forget. And that's the problem. So they can hold on to grudges and misfortunes and mishaps for decades, which also makes it hard as well for democracy and diplomacy when there's any types of diplomatic discussions with China. It makes it very hard because they are, like I said, not forgiving, and they also do not forget.
Excellent. Okay, was there anything else, Erica?
I see here about Arizona, that 164 countries have been represented at the border in the last 12 months. Here in Texas, very similar that is happening here. I know we've had over 100 countries represented as well, which here's the thing, we've actually met some people who have connections, at least here in Texas, to the border town sheriffs. And what they've been finding is that it's been the UN. The UN has been granting paperwork to these immigrants, these migrants that are coming in these caravans to enter into the United States. So therefore, a lot of that is being tied back to the United Nations. I'm not sure if you're seeing that in Arizona or if you've heard that in Arizona, but it's interesting to tie to the UN. What I would like to know, and what we have not been able to find out yet, and I'm still researching and doing my ways, but we're trying to figure out if China is somehow tied to what the UN is doing to further bring instability, because I have actually worked with refugees overseas. Back in 2016, I helped rescue and resettle persecuted Christian families that were specifically targeted by ISIS there in Iraq and Syria. And when ISIS came to the forefront, it was interesting because all this mass caravan, the migrants fleeing Syria into Italy, Greece, Sweden, Germany, it literally affected Sweden and Germany and Greece's economy. Greece's economy collapsed because of the mass caravan. Same thing happened there in Sweden. The whole culture and economy just ruptured, and they became and basically it was basically a destabilization process that happened, and it was very hard for Sweden to get built back up. It was very hard for Greece. Greece is still struggling to rebound from what happened in 2016 and even 2015 with the mass caravan of migrants. So there's concern because that happens, like that is going to impact the people of the nation. It's going to impact the economy. It's going to impact the local communities. It's going to impact the state, because when you have these mass caravans coming and they come into, let's say now, the United States, it becomes where we, the taxpayers, are now responsible in funding and taking care of them. And it doesn't help any of politicians who are allowing it to happen and now changing definitions where we can no longer say that they are illegal. We have to now say that they are, quote, undocumented citizens. They're not a citizen of the United States. So they're now trying to change the words and the meanings of even refugee law and asylum law, which is just astounding to me. But I remember in 2016, we saw that there in Europe, and it shook a lot of these nations in Europe, and it was very hard for them to come back. So there is concern here for the United States. I mean, we look at the inflation, we're at 8.6% inflation rate, which has never happened since 40 years ago. This is the highest it's been. Rent, vehicles, fuel, food, everything has increased, where your normal average American is feeling the pressure. Now add that on top of that, all of the mass migration coming across the border. It's very disconcerting, because we also have seen, and just based on intel that we have received, there's what's called SIAs, which are special interest aliens or special interest areas, which are are individuals who come from a country that's designated as a potential terrorist state. There have been individuals coming across our border from those nations. So that's why I'm a huge proponent that border security is national security. And I always tell people, forget the politics. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's about ensuring the safety of every single American. But we also have to look at the bigger picture. This affects our economy. And if we want to have a secure, prosperous economy, we also have to have a secure nation. So a lot of this all plays in with each other.
I absolutely agree with you, Ashley. In fact, for those of you who weren't on last month, we had Brandon Judd, who spoke on border security, because it's absolutely linked. Our border, our southern border is very porous. Well, all of our borders are porous, but our southern border is the main port of entry right now for just thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants. And we just can't sustain this kind of invasion. It's killing us. And we've got to put a stop to it. And we've got to do something. We've kind of got a little Band-Aid on it right now with Title 42, but that's not going to last forever. And it is just a Band-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically triage. I got a Band-Aid on an artery. So hopefully we'll be able to, if we can last through November, we might be able to flip the House and the Senate and maybe get some better policies in place. Did we have any other questions? We have just a couple of minutes left.
I just want to say that I'm encouraged about November because
Yay, me too.
I totally believe, without a shadow of a doubt, Republicans are going to take back the House and the Senate, which then that's going to cause Biden to have a lame duck for the remainder of his term. 2024 is fast approaching. And what I am seeing, because I get asked this all the time on Fox News Radio, they always say, well, do you think Biden is actually going to run in 2024? I do not. He's not running in 2024. I'll tell you why. Because he is the president, and he's like the only president in history who's had the lowest approval rating. Same thing with the vice president, significant, like lowest approval rating in US history. That Democrats know that. They know that they don't even have a chance, to the point I read a few days ago, Bernie Sanders is now warning that there's going to be a red wave and Republicans are going to take back the House and the Senate. Elizabeth Warren is warning the Democrats, Republicans are going to take back the House and the Senate, and they're saying you've got to change your policy. Well, it's these progressive policies that are not resonating with the American people. It's these progressive policies that are trying to quickly turn America into Venezuela, and it's just not going to work. So I'm actually encouraged, because despite the uncomfortableness that we're feeling of the inflation right now, it's affecting every single American, Republican and Democrat, and Democrats are not liking it. So I'm encouraged for November, and I do believe the media is starting to turn on Joe Biden. So that tells me that there's something in the works for 2024, another candidate coming around the corner. So I guarantee you, I think more is going to be surfacing after we get through our November elections, and I think we'll get a better glimpse of what 24 is going to look like.
I agree with you. When you see how many of the current Democrats that are distancing themselves from President Biden, I think that's a really good indication that he's not going to be the nominee for the Democratic Party. So we'll see who they decide to push forward, but I don't think it's going to be him. Well, and he'll be so much older than any other president has ever been at that point, and he's already having difficulty just with very simple activities, and it's a very strenuous job being a president, and he can't keep up with it. So anyway, thank you so much, Ashley. I just appreciate you being here so much, and I know the ladies really appreciate it. It's been so educational. If you all enjoyed this month's Empower Hour, please plan to join us next month on Tuesday, July 12th, as we talk with Amy Clark on effective communication, the importance of messaging, and having difficult conversations. We all have those family members or very close friends who maybe are not on the conservative side, maybe they're on the lost dark side, and we have to have those difficult conversations. And she's going to help us know how to have those conversations with love and not make the rift even wider, because that's very, very important. And how to message too, so that we are bringing people in and not pushing people away. So join me next month, July 12th, and I can't wait to see you then. Till then, ta-ta.